I've somehow never seen a Robert Eggers film before, so I wasn't sure what to expect going into this film. But as soon as the film started, I was drawn in by how the pacing, camera work, and production design reminded me so much of classic filmmaking that kind of feels lost to us today. In this film, every frame feels like it belongs on the wall of a gallery, just beautifully composed and alive with detail. It's really the kind of film that immerses you in its world. And even more interestingly, it felt like more than just a remake of Murnau's classic Nosferatu from 1922. This film definitely paid homage to that film, but this one also evoked Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like, in other words, it really felt like a remake of Murnau's Nosferatu from 1922, but also Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992. And the visuals even sometimes really reminded me of the old Hammer horror films from the 60s and 70s. But in any case, what I really loved the most about this film was the masterful use of the camera and how it supported the story. A perfect example of this is the scene where Hutter is leaving for Orlok's castle. He's leaving this town in Germany. I forget the name of the town, but he's leaving for Orlok's castle. And as he walks away, the camera slowly pulls away from Ellen, who played by Lily Rose Depp. The camera just slowly pulls away from her, and she's just standing there in the center of the frame, just with this look of despair and anguish on her face. It's a really subtle moment, but the way the camera moves just conveys and communicates to the audience so deeply her sense of abandonment and isolation that she must have been feeling. Another sequence that really stood out for excellent cinematography was the Bordeaux Pass sequence, which honestly, that was the most captivating and brilliantly paced stretches of film I've seen in years. From Hutter's departure when he first leaves the gypsy village to his trek through the desolate mountains and his arrival at Count Orlok's castle, the cinematography and rhythm of the pacing were just extraordinary. I mean, every shot just feels deliberate and purposeful, completely enhancing the mood of isolation and dread. As for the performances, Lily Rose Depp's portrayal of anguish and melancholy, and the way her character is treated as hysterical due to the societal norms of the era, is as effective as anyone else could have played. Her being Johnny Depp's daughter, I kind of went in there with this bias thinking that she was just cast in here because of nepotism. But her performance just quickly dispelled any notion of nepotism casting I had going into the film. She was just great and really added layers of nuance to the character of Ellen. Similarly, Nicholas Hoult really brought a believable vulnerability to Hutter. And of course, Bill Skarsgård and William Dafoe were just equally great as Orlok and Von Franz, respectively. And if you're familiar with Bram Stoker's Dracula, which Nosferatu was an unofficial adaptation of, you'll know that Von Franz is essentially Van Helsing from the Dracula novel. And even more interesting, William Dafoe originally played Orlok, the Count Orlok, in another film that was really great called Shadow of the Vampire. But in any case, speaking of Ellen's Melancholy and Hysteria, let's talk about that for a second, because that was part of the film that I found very interesting, especially coming from a social and behavioral science background. Ellen's diagnosis of melancholy and hysteria in the film is deeply rooted in the historical context of how women were labeled and constrained by patriarchal norms of the time. Her emotional responses are pathologized as mental illness, where her insight and intuition about the danger are just completely outright dismissed. These diagnoses reflect a societal pattern of undermining women's agency and adding layers to the film's exploration of isolation and power dynamics. By framing her distress in medicalized terms, the story is highlighting how the societal views of femininity and mental health further marginalize and isolate Ellen, overshadowing her warnings and silencing of her voice. As far as melancholy is concerned, it has some modern-day equivalents in the DSM. So historically, melancholy was a broad term used to describe sadness or despair. It pretty much covers what we would now recognize as a mood disorder. Today, its closest equivalent in the DSM-5 would typically align with major depressive disorder and persistent depressive disorder, depending on the specific symptoms. This shift mostly just reflects our more modern and better, more nuanced understanding of how these mood disorders manifest. But historically, melancholy was overwhelmingly used to diagnose women. wasn't really, I mean, it was used on men sometimes, but it was disproportionately used on women. And a lot of times it was just used to just shut them up and make them go away and not treat them seriously. However, her other diagnosis in the film, hysteria, that is a much, much more troubling history. Historically, hysteria was used as a catch-all diagnosis. Again, disproportionately applied to women for a wide range of emotional, psychological, and physical symptoms that were poorly understood. So the origins of the word, the term hysteria dates back to ancient Greece, where physicians like Hippocrates believed that the uterus could wander throughout the body, causing emotional and physical symptoms. This concept became the foundation for diagnosing women with unexplained symptoms, and they were just labeled as hysterical. That woman is hysterical, okay? By the 19th century, hysteria was a common diagnosis for women. It applied to everything from mood swings and fainting spells to chronic pain, or even just a defiance of societal norms. Later on, when Freud entered the picture, Sigmund Freud redefined hysteria, associating it with psychological conflicts rather than purely just physiological causes. His famous case studies, like his patient Anna O., framed hysteria as a response to repressed trauma. So there was some progress being made there with Freud, but still not enough, especially when we look back at it through a modern lens. But anyway, over time, hysteria came to be seen as a vague and unscientific diagnosis, reflecting societal biases more than medical or psychological insight. By the mid-20th century, the term was largely abandoned, although not completely abandoned, as we'll see in a second, but it was largely abandoned in favor of more precise and diagnostic categories. So while hysteria is no longer a recognized diagnosis, its legacy continues to live on in several modern conditions, some of which are still controversial. So in the modern era, in the DSM-5, there's what's called histrionic personality disorder. Histrionic personality disorder is one of the cluster B personality disorders, along with narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. These four cluster Bs, as they're commonly referred to, have a lot of overlapping conditions, but histrionic personality disorder is the most direct descendant of hysteria in terms of its focus on exaggerated emotional displays and attention-seeking behavior. The diagnostic criteria in the DSM include behaviors such as being uncomfortable when not the center of attention, rapidly shifting and shallow emotions, using your physical appearance to draw attention, so kind of like being overly sexual or overly seductive, and being overly dramatic or theatrical. Histrionic personality disorder really reflects the historical stereotype of the hysterical woman, though it's important to note that this diagnosis can be applied to men as well. Except this is where it becomes controversial. Usually when men present with these symptoms, men are diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, and when women present with these symptoms, they're diagnosed with histrionic or borderline personality disorder. That's a controversy that's been discussed in psychology for the past few years. But anyway, as far as the film is concerned and Ellen's character, the closest modern equivalent of her hysteria would be histrionic personality disorder. Now, there's also other disorders, too, that echo the historical aspects of hysteria, such as somatic symptom disorder and conversion disorder. But I would argue that the closest equivalent would be histrionic personality disorder. Oh, also, Freud's conception of hysteria often involved disassociation, which that's now categorized separately as a dissociative disorder. But generally speaking, when people are talking about the classic condition of hysteria, they're not really talking about the dissociation too much. They're talking about some of the other symptoms. In any case, there's a serious gendered legacy of hysteria, and the concept of hysteria has long been used to pathologize women's emotions and behaviors. This legacy is still debated in relation to histrionic personality disorder and other gendered diagnoses, like I mentioned before, borderline personality disorder, as these conditions disproportionately affect or are diagnosed in women. Feminist critiques of modern psychology and psychiatry often point out how historical and modern diagnoses can reinforce stereotypes about emotional or irrational women acting hysterically. and this is kind of a problematic thing that still really hasn't been resolved today, that the film seemed to be addressing. Ellen's diagnosis of melancholy and hysteria are not just a reflection of her personal struggle, but also a broader commentary on how societal norms have historically pathologized women's emotions and undermined their agency. Of course, this is just my interpretation of Ellen's character, and I'd be interested to hear other perspectives in the comments below. If you've seen Nosferatu, what did you think about Ellen's symptoms or how her character was presented? But in any case, by framing her distress through the lens of patriarchal medicalization, the film underscores themes of isolation, silencing, and the general dismissal of women's intuition and how their experiences were largely dismissed historically. The film also has historical connections that lend themselves for a deeper analysis through a sociological lens of how fears and anxieties, both personal and collective, extend into societal attitudes toward disease, difference, and fears of the other. So having explored Ellen's diagnosis and its psychological implications, let's shift the focus to the broader societal anxieties that the film explores. So for the original novel that Bram Stoker wrote in the 19th century, it's been argued by many people that in that original novel, Stoker was addressing themes of disease and xenophobia, issues that remain disturbingly relevant today. Stoker's vampire served as a metaphor for the spread of contagion and the fear of the other, reflecting the anxieties of a Victorian society grappling with outbreaks of disease and the growing influx of immigrants. Whether or not it was Eggers' intention in Nosferatu, these fears are resurrected with a chilling resonance. The film evokes the unease of outside threats invading a community, whether through Orlok's supernatural influence as a metaphor for dangerous outsiders, or the stark imagery of vampirism as a disease spreading like a plague. So in our modern world, where we're all still recovering from a global pandemic, and so many parts of the world, especially the Western world, we're grappling with tensions over immigration and, people feeling like they're being displaced, regardless of which side of the political aisle one is on. These themes are pretty pronounced in Western society, and they feel as urgent today as ever, reminding us how fear of the unknown continues to shape our collective psyche all these years later since Stoker wrote his original novel. But anyway, like I said, a lot of people have argued that that was a theme in his original novel, and I would tend to agree with that. And I also felt like I saw that in this modern remake of the film. But what do you think? If you saw the film, did you pick up on any themes of xenophobia or fears of the other? And do you think these anxieties are still relevant in today's world? Let me know in the comments below. But in any case, as I'm sure you could tell, I really enjoyed this film a lot. I thought it was great. There's so many good parts. Like I mentioned, the cinematography was absolutely breathtaking. The performances were good. Great classic story that even though we've heard it before, it was great to see it again. But that said, the film wasn't completely without its flaws. I thought the ending was somewhat confusing. Ellen's motivation in the final moments of the film were clear and understandable. She was reclaiming her agency while saving the city from vampirism, right? That seemed pretty clear to me. At least that's how I interpreted it. That said, Orlok's final actions felt really ambiguous and out of character. Maybe it just went over my head. Maybe I just didn't completely get it. But why did he allow himself to be exposed to the sunlight and die? After going through everything he did in the film, why would he just, okay, this is it. I got the girl. Now I'm just going to let myself die. I mean, is that what he was thinking? I don't know. I don't know if that's what he was thinking. Maybe I just missed something, but that wasn't entirely clear to me why he made that choice. What do you guys think? Did you watch the film? What do you think Orlok was thinking at the end of the film? Anyway, despite these issues, I really liked the film a lot. It was great, and I wouldn't mind seeing it again. I thought it was a really, really powerful and captivating cinematic experience. On a scale of 1 through 10, I would give it a 9 out of 10. Like I said, if the ending had been a little clearer, I think I would call this a perfect film and give it a 10 out of 10. But I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. But in any case, did you see the film? And if so, what did you think about it? And again, what did you think about the Ellen's psychological conditions and the sociological analysis of the film? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you're listening to this and you made it all the way through, thank you for listening. And I hope to see you again soon. Bye.